Chapter 7 A Close Shave. The innkeeper was busy sweeping the floor. He was dressed now, but he still had his nightcap on. The two were eating breakfast. Two men were eating breakfast at one of the tables, beside an open window. When Turi came in, they all turned to stare. "My goodness me!" exclaimed the innkeeper. "Whatever have you been up to?" Turi realized how disheveled he must look. His white robe was stained and torn from his adventures of the previous night, and his hair was wild and unkempt. He realized, too, that he was covered in scratches and cuts after his escape from the Red Riders. "Did you find the Black Knight?" asked the innkeeper. "Yes, I found him," Turi replied somberly. The innkeeper looked him up and down. Then his eyes rested on Turi's left hand, and the surprise on his face slowly gave way to suspicion. Turi followed the man's gaze and saw what he was staring at. The knight's ring. "Isn't that ring?" the innkeeper began. Turi interrupted the innkeeper. "The Black Knight with the white shield is dead," he said quietly. "What's that?" the innkeeper gasped. "Dead? So the knight with the red shield won the duel?" "There was no duel," said Turi. "The knight with the white shield was murdered." "Oh my goodness!" cried the innkeeper. "Murdered?" "Please listen," said Turi. "I have a little time, and what I have to say is of the greatest importance." The men at the table had stopped eating and were staring at Turi. One of them got up and said, "Has something happened to the Black Knight? The one who was here yesterday?" Before Turi could reply, the door flew open and a voice yelled, "Whose is that horse in front of the inn?" Turi turned around. In the doorway stood a burly man with a red face, who glared angrily at each of them in turn. Turi did not recognize the man, but his voice sounded familiar. "It belongs to this young man here," said the man who was sitting at the table. "He's just arrived on that horse." "That's right," said Turi. "It's mine. Well, actually, it's—" He fell silent. Suddenly, he knew who the man in the doorway was. That voice. It was the horse's owner. The man came right up to Turi and roared in his face. "No, it most definitely isn't yours. The horse is mine, and you are a thief who stole it last night." "Good sir," said Turi, "I did not steal it. I only borrowed it for a while. Please forgive me. But the man was too angry to listen. He grabbed Turi by the arm and growled, "Well, I've got you now, thief." He turned to the others and said, "Followed his trail half the night, but then I lost it. I get to the inn, and what do I see? My horse, and the thief along with it." Turi pulled himself free. "I am not a thief," he shouted. "I was planning to return your property to you as any honest man would. Listen, I can explain everything." "Fine words," scoffed the man, "but I believe none of them." "But my good sir," began Turi. "I am not your good sir," the man spat, "and I don't like fine stories like the one you're spinning now. You're one of those lads who are all mouth and no morals." "Just let me explain," cried Turi. "You can explain to the sheriff," said the man. "You're coming with me to the city." To the city? Turi couldn't do that. He had no time to waste, and anyway, he knew already he really couldn't explain anything about his mission. The task itself was a secret and meant keeping quiet about the events that had led up to it. He stepped back and said, "I cannot go with you to the city, but I am no thief, I assure you on my word of honor." "Ha! It gets better," cried the man. "Word of honor? How dare you say that, you villain?" "And how dare you call me a villain?" shouted Turi. He was furious at anyone who would call him that. If everything had gone to plan, he would have been a knight by now, and treated with respect by everyone he met. A villain? Turi, who had been chosen for such an important task? "I don't understand what's going on," cried the innkeeper. "Did he steal your horse? He arrived here in the middle of the night, and he just came back and told me the knight with the white shield had been murdered, and he's wearing his ring. What is the meaning of this?" "I can explain everything," said Turi once again, "but you're not giving me the chance." He spoke calmly, but he felt so anxious inside. The men looked so angry and threatening. "I took your horse," he continued, "because I had to deliver an urgent message." "Poppycock," said the horse's owner. "You could have just asked me if you needed to borrow it, couldn't you? How much time would that have taken? Now you can hold your tongue and come with me. I've had enough of your prattling." "No, wait a moment," said the innkeeper. "There is still something I need him to explain. Whatever happened to the Black Knight with the white shield?" "The knight with the white shield is dead," said Turi, "and I would ask you to ensure that he receives a burial befitting a noble knight. You will find him not far from here." He explained where the knight was to be found. "But who killed him?" asked the innkeeper. "The Red Riders," said Turi. "It was an ambush." "Red Riders!" exclaimed the men at the table. "I saw them. They rode past here early this morning when I... What are you talking about?" shouted the horse's owner. "This boy is a thief, and I want him punished." "But there's been a murder," shouted the innkeeper. "Then he can tell that to the sheriff as well, can't he?" said the man, grabbing hold of Turi again. "But one thing's certain, there's no way I'm letting this young man escape." "The Red Riders," began the man at the table. "The Black Knight," said the innkeeper. But Turi didn't want to hear what they had to say. He tore himself free and ran outside. They would just have to think he was a thief, because he couldn't allow himself to be dragged back to the city. The four men followed him, shouting and yelling as Turi raced into the field. He soon had a lead on his pursuers, but he knew it wouldn't last. He could feel his heart pounding in his throat and saw black spots before his eyes. He slowed down and looked over his shoulder. Then, for a second time, he gathered all of his strength and climbed into a tree. His ruse worked this time as well. The men soon ran past beneath the tree without noticing him. "But I mustn't do it a third time," he thought, as he was getting his breath back. "They say, a trick thrice, and tempt the devil." Turi was exhausted, but fortunately he was able to rest for a short while, and he had to wait until the coast was clear. After some time, the innkeeper and the horse's owner walked by with gloomy faces. The innkeeper had lost his nightcap, and Turi couldn't help but grin, even though the situation was so serious. Things were not looking good for Turi. He had to travel to a distant land to deliver an important letter, and all he had was the robes and clothes on his back. And his tattered robe was far from suitable for such a long journey. He had no weapons, no money, and no horse. People thought he was a thief, and what was more, he had dangerous enemies, the Red Riders and their leader, the Black Knight with the red shield. Turi sighed. He knew the task ahead of him would not be an easy one. "And I haven't even been able to send word to the city," he thought. He would have to do so, one way or another. The horse's owner was sure to report him to the sheriff. Would they realize the city that the so-called thief was the same boy who had escaped the chapel on the night before he was due to become a knight? "Father, mother, and my friends won't believe I'm a thief," thought Turi. "And I don't think the king will either. But they'll sure be worried about me," he sighed again. "Come on," he said sternly to himself. "There's just one thing you should be thinking about. You have to deliver the letter. That's what you promised the knight." Turi looked down to the beautiful ring on his finger and a large stone on it, which sparkled like a diamond. Perhaps it was not such a good idea to wear it on his hand. In fact, it was a really foolish idea. He pulled out the cord that fastened his robe at the neck and slipped it through the ring. Then he hung it around his neck, beneath his shirt, where no one would be able to see it. And then he had to be on his way. He thought it must be safe by now, and perhaps he would somehow manage to find weapons and a horse. "Oh, I'm such a fool," he suddenly thought. "The knight's horse! I can take him." Turi jumped down from the tree. He knew now what he needed to do. First, get the horse, then set off on his journey. That's the end of the chapter.